Good morning. There is not very much to laugh about in the current turmoil in British Columbia's labour relations. But I had a little laugh myself this morning. I was kind of disappointed that the BCGEU has backed away from its idiotic plan to declare news from behind the picket line in the legislature as hot. Now, you know what that would have meant. Hot news, hot declarations, nobody types it, nobody prints it, nobody talks about it, nobody sees it. And if they had just had the guts to keep to that, we could have solved this whole thing over the weekend. Because we could then put the blinders on and declare BCGEU, Solidarity, the teachers, and everybody else hot. And there would have been no reporting of any kind, and all of the crisis would diffuse in less than 48 hours. Such is not, however, the case. So what is the score this morning, if it's possible for anyone to try and spell it out simply? Well, we are making progress in the exemption negotiations carried on between the government and the BCGEU. And it sniffs like they're close to agreement on a form of termination, layoff, and recall language which will give the BCGEU something they should have had in the modified form in the first place, and that is reasonable seniority within ministries. Next question. If they negotiate today that exemption clause built kind of belatedly into Bill 3, does it mean that the BCGEU would go back to work and then negotiate, and it'll take some time, all the tiddly-fiddly details and important details of the agreement envisaged by the original Bill 2. Now, that will not be an easy thing, but if the BCGEU were to go back after negotiating an exemption, the heat would come off much of the situation. Because Solidarity, to me, has radically changed its particular tactics and its sights. I think, and I hope they can accept with some sincerity on both sides, the obvious backing off by Premier Bennett on Bill 2, which could well die on the audit paper, and on Bill 27, the human rights kerfuffle, and perhaps an indication of some modification of the rentalsman mediation section. Now, taking that one step at a time, if the BCGEU gets its exemption, would that exemption apply to all public sector unions? Because remember, not one person, because of Bennett's withdrawal, has yet been fired. And of course, the BCGEU has stated bluntly and clearly at all times that they understand and will accept firings of the casuals and those with this seniority and that seniority. The difference being, though, that the 1,600 or whatever who'd be laid off after this agreement is made might be a different set of people due to the new form of whatever it is, ministry seniority. So that looks hopeful, right? I think I made myself clear. Solidarity seemed to be going only for exemption for all public sector workers. Now, can they go for an exemption for teachers under Bill 3? I see Bill 3 annoying the teachers incredibly over the fact that there is provision there to lift principals and vice principals out of the BCTF. But don't forget, this Bill 3, and I told you this months ago now, is aimed particularly at the highly paid senior management levels throughout the public sector who are not union members. So the union presumably ain't worried too much about that. Then we come to the teachers. Difficult to know what the teachers are up to. They've got a strike vote of some kind, of 59%. I don't think we know the breakdown by school districts. Now, they would seem to be going out on a political protest strike, and how they can do that when they are not, in fact, a union is almost beyond my comprehension. But I'm going to deal with the teachers specifically this morning with two people. Jack Heinrich, the Minister of Education, and then in more detail with the people who are caught right in the squeeze in the middle and don't want to see any general strike taking place in the playgrounds, the BC school trustees through Joy Leach. Also on the program this morning, I have a couple of people freshly back from Grenada. Harvey Totten, who was working with CUSO down there, they got back last Wednesday, and Sue Mitchell. And then to cheer you up on this Friday morning, you know, end of the week, have a quiet, happy weekend, fearful fella called Dimitrios Roussopoulos on the coming of World War III. But first, Jack Heinrich, Minister of Education, after the break. On the telephone from his office in Victoria is Jack Heinrich, the Minister of Education. Did you achieve anything in terms of understandings with the teachers in your meeting yesterday in Nanaimo?
The meeting which I had yesterday in Nanaimo was with the principals and vice principals primarily. There were a number of issues covered. I admit that one of the topics which was discussed was the matter of a press conference which I had held on Wednesday. But I think, you know, I had no alternative but to respond after the notice had been served by the BCTF.
Now, they have served notice for a strike on Tuesday, is that correct?
Yes.
What kind of a strike do they tell you it is? Is it purely a political protest strike, or is it a strike to get you in some way to alter Bill 3?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, it seems to be something to do with budgets and legislation, and I don't really know of anything else. I have not yet received a copy of the contents of the notice which was served on the school boards, which I understand was under the signatures of the president of the local teachers association.
No, I can deal with that with Joy Leach later in the program. But what I want to ask you was, did they ask for you to remove the section of Bill 3 which gives you the power to take principals and vice principals out of the BCTF?
No, that was not requested of me yesterday. The matter which was discussed, and I'm really not at liberty to talk about what went on in a meeting with which was held after my speech. But there were some concerns were expressed by the administrators involving Bill 3, but it's primarily to do with the regulations which haven't come down involving the Compensation Stabilization Office.
Now, I know the teachers have an observer at most of the meetings of the BCGEU. Are they seeking, and are you considering, some kind of exemption for them to give them a form of seniority similar to the BCGEU?
Well, if you look at Bill 3, you will see Section 3, subsection 1 makes reference to a contract of employment.
Right.
And that's exactly what teachers have with each of their school districts, is a contract of employment. And if they can put a provision within that contract of employment, that is, by negotiating in that contract with their respective school boards, a provision which is satisfactory to the Compensation Stabilization Commissioner, I do not see any reason why they could not achieve exactly what was worked out and is out now for ratification with the BC Ferry Corporation.
The same kind of thing, that which is being aimed at now and hopefully successfully with the BCGEU.
Yes.
Because just a paragraph of background, the other formal trade unions affected by public sector restraint union can at any time go to PEC and say, we've got satisfactory termination, layoff and recall provisions, exempt us, right?
That's my understanding.
Now, let me put the question this way.
I beg your pardon?
Is there anything that can avoid the layoffs of teachers, Vancouver down $16 million, at the end of the school year?
Well, first of all, looking at the Vancouver School District, I've been doing a fair amount of work with them, recognizing that the enrollment in the Vancouver School District has declined substantially over the last 7 years. It's gone down from roughly 61, I'm using rounded figures, a little better than 61,000 down to something in the order of 51,000.
Right.
Now, they have a particularly difficult problem, and I'm working now on a program where, in fact, there are funds to which the school board does have access with ministerial permission, and where we can use interest which is accrued on those particular funds to ease the transition so that there will be a minimum of disruption in the full school year. That is, we look at the fall term and the spring term. And what we're trying to do is to minimize any problems that will occur in that area. That's been a matter of...
In other words, you don't have $40 million up your sleeve or anything, but you're saying you don't have $40 million up your sleeve, but you're saying there may be interest monies held by the school boards which could be used to lessen the effect of the layoffs in the spring and fall terms.
Well, in the spring, going into the spring term of 1984.
I've got that. But the fact remains is that the strictures on your finances will require layoffs of teachers, but maybe not the 3,000 presently estimated by the BCTF.
No, Jack, you know, what happens when we get into these sort of problems is that I think the extreme positions are raised, and that's what upsets a number of people. I think you must look at to see, no one really knows how many layoffs will occur over the full school year or come next summer. You just don't know that.
Fair enough.
The district is totally different. Now, what's important here is this. You know, you look at the number of teachers who leave. I've got figures for the school year 1980-81 and 1981-1982, which are clear, where the roughly, I think, 1,500 rounded in one year, 1,350, 1,400 in the following year. So I don't really think it's going to be what in fact is being alleged by the BCTF. Okay,
I don't want to raise any heat this morning, to be quite honest, but if this strike goes ahead on Tuesday, you've already guaranteed that teachers who want to work will be able to go to work?
My position is very clear. All of the legal opinions which I have indicate that a withdrawal of services will be a contravention of the School Act, and there will be a contravention of their contract of employment. I have had so many calls into the ministry offices, into my own office from around the province, indicating that teachers are concerned that should they go across a line, in other words, should they go across that their certificate, the allegation has not been made, but it seems by the number of calls which have come in, there's something going on out there. And I wanted to assure teachers in no uncertain terms that should they not commit the illegal act, that as far as I'm concerned, i.e. go to work, that their certificates are not in jeopardy.
Okay, and of course, when it comes to the nitty-gritty, if you can find some flexibility or not, it's the poor old school trustees who are going to have to make the finite decisions on running the schools during a strike or laying off when the financial crisis gets tighter, right?
Correct. And I have really done a tremendous amount with the school trustees. They've been most helpful and cooperative. Their leader has done, I think, an admirable job. We're all faced with a most difficult problem right now, and we've got to recognize it. The reality of the world and what's happening in British Columbia, it must be faced head-on.
Are you going to meet with the BCTF over the weekend to attempt to forestall any strike action?
No, there has been no arrangement made for that at all.
Are you prepared to meet with them?
There's another issue which is going on right now, which I think is, you're very much aware of it, where I think energies ought to be concentrated.
That's the BCGEU negotiation for an exemption which conceivably might apply to the school teachers.
I have no comment on what those negotiations are, but I believe that that's where the efforts ought to go.
My thanks to Jack Heinrich, Minister of Labour. I'll be back after the break.
Thank you.
Now, just for the record this morning, I've got on the phone Pat Clarke, Vice President of the BC Teachers Federation. Now, you heard some of what Jack Heinrich said, but let me put it to you in my form. You are observers at the BCGEU negotiations, correct?
Yes, that's right.
If they get an exemption on a seniority layoff and recall provision which is satisfactory, do you want the same exemption?
Yes, we do.
What would that do for you?
What that would do would be allow us to have the same kind of seniority provisions and provisions for orderly layoff that every other worker in the province traditionally has in their contract.
Even though you're not a union, you're apparently covered by Bill 3 because you're a contract of employment, correct?
That's right.
So therefore, if you got an exemption over the weekend, would that delay your strike? Would that put off your strike for Tuesday?
Well, it would be going a long way to doing that, Jack, but we still have an added problem which we need some assurance on. And that's the effect of the School Act on teacher salary negotiations.
You're saying that if you got an exemption under Bill 3, you'd be afraid the government would jump to the School Act, which allows you to negotiate only for salaries and bonuses.
Not so much the government, but individual boards.
School boards. In other words, that would therefore put you in a more detailed contract of employment, which would give you seniority provisions in your contract, recall provisions.
That's right.
The Act would have to be amended to enable you to negotiate for more than salaries and bonuses.
That's our view.
And if you got that over the weekend, you would call off your strike?
Well, we would have the kind of settlement that would enable us to call the strike off, because it's quite frankly related to the key issue is related to the question of tenure and seniority provisions.
As of this moment, your strike, therefore, is purely, you might say, an ad hoc political protest strike for a day.
No, it's not for a day.
Is it a political protest strike?
It is a political protest strike.
So, and it would, of course, be illegal.
No, it wouldn't. Our view is that it's not illegal, that there's clear precedent that teachers are entirely entitled, and other employees are entirely entitled to this sort of an action.
Yeah, but I know it's encouraging to hear what you say, because if your strike, for some reason, is put off for Tuesday, supposing the talks go well, and on Sunday or Monday, the BCGEU gets its exemption order, you will then be in a position to call off your strike.
Yes, depending on the nature of the exemption order and whether or not we can apply it to teachers, and whether or not at the same time the GEU is settled.
That's understood. Because as realists, if you get your seniority provision satisfactorily,
yes,
of some kind,
yes,
you know well that teachers over the next school year will be laid off.
Well, that's obvious, and there's an awful lot about this that we're still extremely unhappy about.
I can understand that, but I'm just looking at today's Friday position for your crisis, possibly all our crisis on Tuesday, and I'm grateful for your information, Pat Clarke, Vice President of the BCTF.
Thanks, Jack.
I'll take a break and come back with Joy Leach. Thanks, Pat. Caught in the middle are the school trustees of British Columbia. They're in the squeeze. They have to carry out the government legislation. Their money is trimmed and pared. They've got to decide who and when is laid off. Joy Leach is the president of the BC School Trustees Association. Information this morning from Clarke and Heinrich. Is it of any comfort to you at all?
Well, not particularly, because I didn't see any indication that the two parties, and they are the two parties in this dispute, we are not, I didn't see any indication that they were prepared to attempt to prevent what I think will be a disaster in our schools on Tuesday.
That's if they go out.
I think they have a responsibility to do more than simply talk at this point.
And by they, you mean both the BCTF and the Ministry of Education?
Exactly, Jack, because school boards, who are naturally the employers of teachers and non-teaching people working in the education system, have been absolutely sidelined in this issue. And we are standing on the sideline along with parents and children watching two gladiators at war on our playgrounds.
Is it avoidable? I mean, there's no way you can avoid it at this particular stage, though. You're now entirely in the hands of the BCTF and the government. We
have no way to avoid it. We have absolutely no way to affect a resolution. But I think that there is a way, if intelligence is applied, for the dispute not to spill over into the schools at this time. And I think that it's incumbent upon both those parties to act responsibly and come to some resolve.
Be more specific, though. What do you want to be done? You had Heinrich this morning talking about certain school boards like Vancouver being able to use interest monies on protected funds, I suppose. That's no panacea, is it?
On that particular issue, it's not helpful. I think that what the minister didn't mention, however, is that he's done something that I think is very useful. He's agreed to meet with the BC School Trustees Association on November 28th to take a very close look at the entire funding formula, the framework which is underpinning all of the legislation that's directed at schools for financing. And he's agreed to do that with school trustees. And if it appears that revision is necessary to that formula, he has indicated that he would be interested in examining those revisions. I think that will build in flexibility. Well, it's not too late in that it takes time to do those things properly, and I think that I accept that he is progressing with goodwill. There's no question about it. But that is not directly related to what's happening at the moment, just about to happen in our school grounds. What we need there is a clear opportunity for the two parties to clarify their positions with each other and to stop taking very inflexible positions and to find some way of avoiding strike action in our schools.
Well, I was quite impressed by Pat Clarke of the BCTF this morning, who said that it's conceivable that the exemption agreement giving the BCGEU a pattern of seniority acceptable under the ability to pay formula, but if that were accepted by the BCTF, could you cope with that as school trustees? You'd have to rewrite every school contract of employment.
School trustees conduct their business under legislation which is written by the government of the day. If the government of the day prescribes that, we will do it.
What's going to happen on Tuesday if this unfortunate strike goes effect? What will the school districts do? Have you made a policy as a body to keep all school districts open?
No, we can't do that. We are not provincial gladiators and don't have that structure. My association is made up of independent school boards, autonomous school districts, 75 of them. Each district will make its own decision as a separate corporate body.
What have you decided in Nanaimo?
Well, certainly we, along with all school boards, expect our employees to report to work.
And therefore, whether or not they report to work, you will keep the schools open, at least in the initial stages?
We will keep the schools open as long as we are able. We are required to do so by law.
So the only way this can be avoided over the weekend is a settlement of the BCGEU exemption. Is that correct?
Well, that's an extremely frustrating thing for me to hear, because school boards have nothing to do, and children of British Columbia have nothing to do with BCGEU workers and BCGEU contracts. I don't think that it's necessary for us to wait for settlement of BCGEU differences with government. I think that it is entirely possible for this to be resolved simply by an agreement being reached between the Minister of Education and BCTF.
On
the question of exemption from Bill 3.
Well,
I think
first of all, that's got to be worked out with the BCGEU.
I don't think that that's the case.
Now, let's work it out now. Between the minister,
work it out now.
Get an exemption going now.
We're not interested in waiting for a dance to be completed. We think that it is possible for people of goodwill to resolve this difference before it spills over into our schools. That position, I'm sure, is shared by every parent in the province of British Columbia. And I believe that it's shared with almost every person that's working within the system. I don't believe for a minute these people want to take strike action. I don't believe that it's in their nature to want to do that. I think they're pushed to the wall at the moment. I think the issues are totally confused.
Totally confused, but I would point to you...
it's time for everyone to cool off.
I would point to you the initial strength and recent strength of solidarity on the streets, even if their objects at the moment, as of today, are considerably confused. And that solidarity has some clout, and if this goes out, the Lord knows what will happen after Tuesday.
If we're talking about teachers joining an overall demonstration by solidarity, it would be useful for us to know that. At this point, we don't know that.
Yes, they said political protest strike.
Political protests are not strikes. And certainly in this instance, particularly from the perspective of school boards, we're not witnessing a strike because we do not have a contract dispute. It's really quite outrageous to think that we're going to see a strike, and I don't believe that therefore you can call it a strike. If we are to see a strike, which is not certain, it's certainly not a traditional contract dispute, because we are negotiating with our teachers at this time, and those negotiations are progressing.
You're not in a position at any time, even if you wanted to legally close the schools within the school year.
No, our superintendent is in a position to close the schools, however, in certain events.
Health and security.
That's right.
Questions and calls to John Leach of the BCSTA after the break. Well, the situation seems to be a little clearer this morning than it's been for some considerable time, right?
I think that the situation is clearer. I think, however, for us to properly understand what's going on, it's necessary for us to stand way back. And I really think that if you, Jack, have any advice, and certainly if I have any advice to all of the parties involved in the huge disruption in the province of British Columbia right now, it is that they have to stand back and consider what their responsibility in leadership is. Well, and they should be imposing intelligence on that leadership at this time. If we don't, Jack, it's not just the schools that are going to be hit. It's the province of British Columbia. And the notion of a general strike in this province is outrageous and unacceptable to any individual with any sense at all, because this is not fun and this is not exciting. This is the kind of thing that tears at the roots and the social fabric and has the elements of civil war. Well, we have to stop and stop right now and cool off. And most certainly that's what we as trustees know.
Well, now, I don't want to conduct an inquest this morning of the entire...
This is not placing blame.
No, the entire mishmash which has happened since July the 7th. Yes, since July the 7th, since the bills were put into the House. But surely it's an incontrovertible fact that Bennett has backed down on a number, appears to be backing down quite substantially, one on Bill 2, which is on the back burner if they make this agreement, correct?
Yeah, I don't even think that we need to go through sort of a series or an accounting of actions. What we know is that insufficient action has been, and movement and concession has been made by all parties concerned.
And you can see, I can see not the terror, but I can see the concern on your face that were the teachers to go out on Tuesday, while no one single person has yet been fired under this program, that they would be the spearhead of a general strike.
I think it's the flashpoint. That's what I think. I think that if this whole business spills into the school area, now I do believe that it's possible that if we all remain cool, that it is possible that on Tuesday, whatever might happen can be handled intelligently, and we would see a return to normalcy in our schools very quickly. And I think that that's what school boards are trying to do. They're trying to manage locally a very difficult situation which is being imposed from outside, from a provincial problem. And I think that you'll see different scenarios in every school district in the province of British Columbia.
Some might strike and some might not.
I'm sure that's a possibility. But I think that the worst possible thing that we could do as school boards and as members of the public is anticipate action that has not yet happened.
In other words, don't whip up a strike for Tuesday.
Don't lead a strike.
Well, Solidarity does seem to have radically altered its overall blanket determination and is now down at the point where they're going for this exemption agreement for all public sector employees, including, it would now seem, the teachers.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like a bottom line, doesn't it?
It does.
And there's been a lot of concession there.
But mind you, there are, let's be honest about it, there are factors involved which are largely, as Kubi said last night, the dynamics. And I had a union leader on yesterday who told me, and I was absolutely shocked, that it didn't matter if there was going to be a strike on a settlement with the BCGEU, they'd pull the transit out next Tuesday.
Well, essentially that's what I'm talking about. I think that I lived in Memphis, Tennessee, and while I was there, I watched that city warm up every year for a riot. And they did it and the press assisted greatly in that, because they would say things like, no riots yet in Orange Mound. And then suddenly, riots would be breaking out because they were expected, and then they would say, terrible, riots in Orange Mound. Now, really what was happening is that the press and the police were sending helicopters in to run around, to watch, to see if a riot was happening in Orange Mound. The people finally living in Orange Mound got so fed up, they threw rocks at the helicopter, and that fired the strike. Now, what you and I can't do, what you and I must not do, and what others must not do, is throw rocks at the helicopters.
Well, perhaps my suggestion this morning of no coverage at all and declare everything hot.
Not a half-bad solution to a very difficult, volatile situation. Let the parties reason together. And I believe, you know for certain, that whether there's a general strike or not, we will get beyond this. Now, because the price of a general strike in our societies, in our communities, is too high, solve it before.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is the government cannot lose a general strike. We all lose, but the government cannot lose a general strike.
Oh, I disagree with you. Everybody loses.
Everybody
with a general
loses,
strike.
but the
And the government loses. They lose face. The unions have their faces invested in this. The government has their face invested in this. I want to know what escape routes they planned, because wise leaders always know the door they're going to leave by. I want to know if they have nailed those doors shut, and if so, I charge them with the responsibility of finding those routes together, and it is only on the common ground that they will find those routes.
And you're saying it's incumbent on both Heinrich and the BCTF this weekend to find a solution to the concerns of the teachers as to seniority and firings? Because at the moment,
so.
You believe so. You have no such provisions in the School Act.
We have, no. And we have absolutely no handles at the local level to solve that problem. That's a legislative problem. So that we have no way to protect our children at this point from this kind of disruption.
Perhaps it's time Premier Bennett entered into particularly the school negotiations over the weekend and settled it.
Sure. If strategists are wondering about timing, I would suggest that they start thinking that the timing is now to prevent disaster.
The two factors. One, the BCGEU exemption. And of course, every other legitimate trade union has the power now to show their termination, layoff, and recall things to EdPEC. And EdPEC, if he's satisfied with them, will say, OK, you're exempted from Bill 3.
Yeah.
But you're saying don't leave the teachers on the firing line in some woozy position with a BCGEU agreement near. That Heinrich, will say Heinrich, and the teachers should this weekend solve that problem of their exemption from Bill 3.
I think it should definitely be taken care of this weekend. It's ridiculous to think that you're going to have a public sector settlement that excludes teachers anyway, because they are public sector.
Yeah, that means eventually an amendment to the School Act, but that could come later.
I'm sure that it could be taken care of.
Okay, I'm going to go to the phones. Well, you've made a very statesmanlike pitch because you're the chairman of the BC School Trustees, caught in the squeeze, you must carry out government orders, you have no independent powers of your own to intervene in any way, shape or form.
We actually, in this dispute, have taken on the traditional role of government. Usually, in labor disputes, government is the third party observing and trying to protect the broad public interest. Government is now changing that position, and they, in fact, are one of the combatants, if you will, so that we have the adversarial system moved from the normal employer-employee relationship to government and employees, with the employers sitting on the sideline.
And we
must at least protect the public interest and speak for the public, and the public does not want this foolishness to continue.
You're fearful that we in the media, covering everything that happens on a quick spot basis, will do the Orange Mound caper.
I think so, and I think that you're throwing rocks at the helicopter, encouraging others to throw rocks at the helicopters, and the only thing that can come out of that is pain and agony in our communities, and I don't think that this province needs it.
Go ahead to Joy Leach.
Yes, good morning. It's refreshing to have someone on your show that, in fact, I totally agree with. I'm wondering how strong the support of solidarity really is. I attended a union meeting which was connected with the education system the other day, and in fact the vote went 51-49% in favour of strike action in support of solidarity, which means 49% of the people do not want to support solidarity.
You wouldn't tell me which union, would you?
No, I wouldn't.
No, you wouldn't. Why not?
Because if I've been told at the union meeting that if I do not go out on strike, then I could face disciplinary action by my union. Now, I think that political protest is, in fact, tantamount to civil disobedience. And being led into civil disobedience when I don't agree with it, I think, is wrong.
Now, I think this is an opportunity, and I appreciate what the caller is saying. I don't think we should misinterpret that information. I think that we are all aware that we have the ingredients of a civil strife here. And it's because 50-50, it's a 50-50 split. Half of us in this society want to do something and half of us don't. Now, what we have to do is say, again, I'm going to say, where's the common ground? I don't believe that we ought to start bashing each other or threatening each other or intimidating each other. What we've got to figure out together as partners with disagreement, how we're going to go forward without hurting each other. So the first thing it takes is respect of the other side. And we're talking about positions of principle that are being drawn. Now, if we are so principled, that must mean that we are also somewhat intelligent and can find out how we're not going to lose in this thing.
Good point. Go ahead, please. What are you?
Hello there.
That's you.
Oh, good. First of all, I'm a trade unionist, and but I can't agree more with your guest this morning. And the basic solidarity, I was all for solidarity until Kramer started spouting off about civil disobedience being legal, and that is not a fact. The battle plan of solidarity, along with the BC Fed, is to push the government until they topple the government. This is their basic plan, and the basic battle plan is to you're.
Well, now, I think we could modify that a little this morning, because it seems to me, watching and talking to Cuby especially, that they seem to have lightened the position quite considerable.
Oh, don't trust Cuby.
Oh, now again, you're throwing a rock at the helicopter. There is no point
Ma'am, I've been in the trade union movement for nearly 40 years.
That's not the point. There's no point in suggesting that Solidarity is more or less responsible for this than government or any other person that is splitting on this issue. We're talking about a fundamental division in the province. And we're becoming the laughingstock of this nation because we're so polarized.
You're right.
We can't manage ourselves together.
We've lost business to the Orient, to Europe, and if you want a real example of union screwing up is the Port of Vancouver itself. Look at all our container business.
You're throwing more rocks at the helicopter at this particular time.
Well, it's time to bring the helicopter down.
Aha.
Whose helicopter?
Well.
And who's in the helicopter?
Whose helicopter?
Well, I'm afraid there's going to be violence in the streets if it doesn't stop.
Well, this is the time to pause and say,
I agree, we've got to have reason.
We must avoid a general strike.
The people of British Columbia do not deserve to have this kind of activity happening in their backyard.
Don't deserve anarchy.
But then you have to contribute to the diplomacy that will lead us out of it.
My God, I'm trying. You know, I've tried to be a diplomat within the trade union movement. And there's no way. You've got too many radical, hard left-wingers. As a matter of fact, you've got too many Marxist-Leninists running the whole thing.
Okay, hold on.
More of them on later in the program.
Yeah, I know that. No, I haven't got any Marxist-Leninists on later in the program, as far as I know. It's difficult, you know, because my automatic response is to jump and fight after the break.
That's right.
Another segment. For the first time in this crisis, we've come across what seems to be a voice of sanity from Joy Leach of the BC School Trustees Association, because they are helplessly cowering in the middle of a fight between two giants, the BC Teachers Federation and the provincial government. Is that correct?
Perhaps not cowering, but we're certainly now in observer status, along with the rest of the people of British Columbia.
And at all costs, you want to avoid the teachers being the spearhead for a general strike.
Or the victims.
Or the victims. Go ahead from Kamloops.
Good morning, Joy.
Good morning.
Caribou College voted 52% in favor of not backing Solidarity. Now, is this going to set a precedent for BC teachers to follow? And if so, what serious ramifications will result from this vote?
Kamloops College, Caribou College, 62% against it. I don't know.
I don't know that a 62% vote
52%.
A 52% vote is a vote that does anything more than to reveal.
52%.
I don't think it does anything more than reveal that we have almost a total split. That's as close to 50-50 as I can see in a vote. And I don't know, it reveals very clearly to me that the entire province is split on the issue.
I agree with you on that. Go ahead from on this line.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
My husband teaches in Surrey. He voted no to the strike. He wants to go to school on Tuesday. Yesterday he came home and he said there was a rumor in his school that the BCTF will cancel the membership of any teacher who goes to school on Tuesday.
The BCTF have not said that.
Oh, I know, but I phoned BCTF and they wouldn't give me a definite answer. The woman said that they take their recommendation from each separate district. So she said, phone the Surrey Teachers Association. I spoke to an officer there. I have her name. She said that that is definitely true. They're having a meeting on Saturday, that their recommendation is that any teacher who goes to school on Tuesday will have their membership canceled, and that they are, and I said, you realize they will not be able to teach in BC anymore? She said, definitely, yes, that is what they want.
Did you hear the Minister of Education this morning?
Yes, I did. But, you know, for teachers are inside. My husband, for example, is in school. He is very upset, very concerned. His whole staff is very upset.
Heinrich says he will protect the status of any teachers who want to work. That was loud and clear. Joy.
Yeah. Again, first of all, the thing we have to set aside is fear and return to reason. And, of course, your husband has to worry about how he's going to get along with his colleagues. That's going to be his biggest concern.
Yes.
I think that one ought not to begin to fear the people that you work with. That's, I think it's an exaggeration of what is going to take place. So try to be reasonable about it and cautious. And obviously, in this whole event that seems to be unfolding in front of our eyes, we have to care about each other and have respect for the positions of principle that are taken, and I believe that that will happen.
But that is another strong indication why something must be achieved before Tuesday in light of the progress with the BCGEU,
That's right.
which we understand.
We have the elements of a civil war. We have, our families are being split. In our school system, we simply cannot afford to have that kind of division if we want to have any kind of excellence in education in the province.
Go ahead from Parksville.
Yes, I'm a mother of 2 children in the Arrington area, and one child is 5 miles away from the school, the other is 15 miles away from school. Now, we were told by the school board that possibly after Christmas, because of the budget, we might not have school busing. And as for splitting the families, I think it's Mr. Bennett that is splitting the families and not the teachers or anybody else. I'm fully behind any strike action whatsoever that there might be.
Please understand that I don't think that the teachers are contributing to this division any more than anyone else. I don't believe that at all. This is not, we are not throwing rocks at anybody. We're suggesting that we simply cannot go on this way, because if you take the logical consequence of the division, which seems to be so even in the province, we're going to have a civil strife in this province that we will not recover from. And we must say at the local level, please stop it now.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, folks. I'd just like to say this. Once again, you're at a situation where you've got the government on one side and the teachers on the other side, and everybody's worried about their rights and what's happening. How about worrying about the students whose year it is probably going to, if it's a lengthy strike, whose year it's probably going to mess up? I think the education standard of this province is so low, we cannot afford to have anything cause any sort of a shutdown.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack. I'm very interested and very pleased to hear your guest speaking the way she is. I agree with her completely that this is a very serious situation and it's bordering on civil strife. But my question is this: how is it that we have allowed 3 people, Mr. Fryer, the head of the School Teachers Association, what's his name?
Larry Keane.
Larry Keane, and this fellow Cuby, whose total tenure in this country wouldn't amount to one man's lifetime, and they're orchestrating this whole situation. Mr. Cuby had the nerve to announce on television the other evening that he was prepared to tell people to break the law. I asked them, what is their commitment to the people of this province? They haven't been here long enough to have any loyalty, any allegiance, or know anything about this country, and they are in a position of authority.
Okay.
I think it's a sad commentary on the people who are behind them to allow those people to be in that position.
Thank you, sir. Now, on the telephone from Victoria, I've got John Walsh, the Executive Director of Policy and Legislative Services, who thinks, in the Department of Education. Which line is he on? He wants to tell us something we or you or I may have misunderstood. Go ahead, Mr. Walsh.
Okay, Jack. The point has been made that the minister should negotiate with the BCTF.
Right.
Now, I have the Public Sector Restraint Act right in front of me, and in Part 2, subsection 7, it says, notwithstanding the School Act, this act applies to a teacher who is employed by a board of school trustees. And what that means is that each school board of this province can negotiate with each local district teachers association on anything to do with the act, and that includes the exemption order, which is section 3.
Does that mean that school boards then can negotiate exemptions?
does mean, Joy, that when you're dealing with your collective agreement, which between now and Christmas, you're just after, part of it could be the negotiation of, it's the parts of the exemption order which deal with layoffs, terminations, recall, and compensation associated with it.
Mm-hmm. John, I'm aware that school boards, in fact, are already discussing with their teachers seniority, and I know, for example, that almost all school boards in the province of British Columbia believe that such conditions, such clauses need to exist.
Yes.
Since that's true, and since those negotiations are going on harmoniously at the moment, then what is it that you think that the teachers are expecting as a result of the action that they have suggested they might take on Tuesday? If it isn't to get the same conditions that BCGEU will achieve, then what is it that you think they want?
That's a good question. If you could divorce them, as you said earlier on, we ought to, from the school system itself.
Well, let me make myself try and understand this. The BCGEU agreement on seniority, if any, would therefore come out as a guideline acceptable or unacceptable to the teachers, and in the next stage, notwithstanding the School Act, the provisions agreed to or potentially agreed to under Bill 3 could be applied by school trustees to their particular teachers under contract. Is that right?
Well, really, Jack, the only reason why I rang was to make a single point.
And you've made the point, and I'm glad you...
But before you leave, I don't think you've made the point clearly enough for my satisfaction, at least.
Joy, go ahead.
Because it seems to me that it is still quite unclear, and it's unclear to school boards as well, what will happen in terms of principals and vice principals.
Oh, you're talking now about another section of Bill 3.
Yes.
Yes, and I think that that's the one.
I wouldn't bring this one into what you're talking about now. It just might cloud the issue. That's another issue altogether. All I wanted to really make to the point to you, Jack, was that if for anybody who wants to look it up, you know, to verify.
Yeah, I've got that, and I'm grateful, but I join with Joy in her little giggle. But thank you. That's a separate issue in which we cannot involve you.
No.
At this moment. Have you got a final question?
No, not with the policy.
Thanks very much.
Now, the point is if it is as easy as that, then what are we talking about? And clearly, if it's as easy as that, there must be just a misunderstanding between teachers and the Minister of Education, and they could resolve that quickly in a half-hour meeting this afternoon.
On this itself?
Yes, precisely.
Subject to the details of the agreement with the BCGEU.
Whatever. That's right. And then let's...
Well, we've established something clearly this morning, that if this exemption, or a variation of it, can be fixed up over the weekend under Bill 3, teacher strike could be off for Tuesday.
The other thing we've established, that if people honestly will respect their positions, each other's positions, and have a good dialogue, we do not have to have the catastrophe that could strike this province next week.
Oh, we'll see what effect your particularly sane attitude and outlook this morning might or might not have on the current very delicate negotiations over the weekend, as a result of which, or as a result of anything, could still see your teachers spearheading on the playgrounds disastrous industrial conflict in British Columbia. Right? Last word.
Or they could be victims.
My thanks to Joy Leach. Change of pace. Thank goodness. After the break. Them. One segment right now. What?
Not here. Just touch the damn thing and then...
I'll give them 9.
Okay.
Oh, 6. Okay. We'll do that. I put up the phones at the beginning of this program. Intelligent and just... This is a in British Columbia. Heavy scene.
Right.
And I was taking it. I'm not about to whip up a bloody general strike in this goddamn province. About to whip up a general strike. I've done my share of whipping up earlier in the battle, you know. Jeez. Where are you from, Sue? Eyewitnesses from Grenada. You've heard and read about Sue Mitchell from Chilliwack now. and Harvey Totten from where again?
Chilliwack again.
From Chilliwack again. And they were caught in the middle of it down in Grenada when they were working as CUSO workers. So let's get right to nitty-gritty. Did you expect a rescue operation, if you forgive the expression, from the Americans?
No, we expected a rescue operation from the Canadians. Now, just a moment, let's get this straight. The rescue operation didn't even come in until after the invasion, if you understand what I mean.
I was merely
You're talking about the Americans coming in and rescuing somebody? No, 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 no.
That wasn't the case at all?
No.
Let's go back to the beginning. How long had you been in Grenada?
About 21 months.
And what were you doing?
I was working with the Food and Nutrition Council, helping to prepare education materials.
For CUSO?
Through CUSO, yeah. CUSO helped to fund the project.
Oh, you were working there for the government of Grenada?
In a sense, it's a statutory body.
Statutory body. And how were conditions in Grenada immediately before the American invasion?
Well, they were kind of tense because there had been the unfortunate tragedy when the Prime Minister and much of his cabinet had been killed just prior to that.
That's the man Bishop?
Right.
He had done the coup from the other fellow whose name was what?
No, 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 it's not as simple as that.
I think it was quite the way that...
You explain it to me.
Well, it seemed that there were some internal problems within the party, but this was not public knowledge. We knew that we had no idea that there was anything wrong until the Friday before the disaster began. And then information that we got afterwards is that there were some problems within the NJM party that they were trying to sort out. I don't well know the details of it because I wasn't intimately involved in that sense.
But what you did know
the thing blew up into a big problem. The Prime Minister was put under house arrest. The population did not have much information on what was going on, and they were very upset about it. So then they staged a demonstration on the Wednesday and went to free the Prime Minister from house arrest.
And it was that particular time, was it not, that the massacre of Bishop and some other people took place?
I suppose, but then can we call this thing a massacre? You have to
assassination.
Well, no, it wasn't even that. It was an emotional thing, one group against the other group, and the death of Bishop was the upshot of it, because we can't call it an assassination. It was a foolish thing. It was an unplanned thing.
Oh, there was a split in the cabinet, and a group of what Reagan called left-wing thugs took over and killed Bishop and a number of other people.
Reagan called it that. I have to admit, Reagan called it that, but Reagan wasn't there, you see, and he didn't realize, as we realized, the emotions behind the people. And what led up the whole thing? It was one emotional mistake.
How many people were killed in that? Because the Americans said maybe hundreds, but we never had any count.
I would be awfully surprised if it was hundreds. I think we heard a figure of about 17, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was more than that.
Now, when the Americans invaded, it was a hell of a big force, was it 6,000?
A couple of snow.
How big was the Grenadian, quote, army?
There was supposed to be 1,000 men under arms and 1,500 militia.
And 784 Cubans.
Something like that.
Which?
784 Cubans.
Right,
yeah.
Okay.
Was the Cuban presence on the island very visible and quite tough?
Quite tough. It was visible in the sense that there was a large force working at the airport that they were building. The airport, by the way, was probably one of the biggest tourist attractions. This thing of having to use satellites to get pictures of it was ludicrous because anyone could go there. There was no armed guard or anything like that.
Tourists could take pictures of the airport.
Absolutely, absolutely. Nobody even questioned why you were there or anything. You just walked down to the airport, and if you wanted to talk to a Grenadian worker, if you wanted to talk to a Cuban worker, well, that was no problem.
So what do you tell me about, we saw the American coverage done by the censored films of the military. I mean, for the Americans not to take the press in on the first jump was highly unusual. Are we entitled to be impressed that the Cubans had established the basis of a big garrison or a transshipment operation to Angola or something in that place?
No, that's just...
What do you say to that?
One more American lie. If you tell enough of them, people are going to believe some of them.
In other words, a bunch of garbage.
Bunch of garbage. Best way they could have put it.
There would be a lot of small arms and light weapons there. That was quite obvious, wasn't it?
Certainly.
For the Grenadian forces.
For the Grenadian forces. By the way, some of these weapons were accumulated by Gary, and now we find that some were as old as 1870. but they are held up as being some sort of a ferocious buildup of arms by the Russians, Cubans, all that kind of garbage.
Now, the amount of armament that the Americans brought in was absolutely ludicrous. I couldn't believe it. We have an island that's slightly bigger than Texada Island with 15 gunships around it. There was one attack that we saw. We were actually kind of front row center. The house where we were looked out, so we could see where the airport was. We could see Fort Rupert. We were fairly close to Richmond Hill where the mental hospital was bombed. In one attack on Grand Anse Beach, we counted 15 or 16 of these helicopter gunships, 3 of these, I don't know what they're really called, a delta wing jet that comes in and shoots 6,000 rounds a minute over a
After they pass the target, they come in like this, and after they pass the target, they fire backward by
from the back of it.
Computerized pattern so that every square foot of the ground is covered by these gigantic slugs that are about this long and this big around. By the way, they were described to us by the U.S. Marines. And when Tony Scogans from Halifax mentioned this was something like apocalypse now, the Marine said words to the effect that, yes, and aren't we lucky it's on our side.
In other words, you were terrified by the behavior of the American invading forces in Grenada.
Yes.
Totally unnecessary. They could have done it with a much smaller number of people if they wanted to invade the place.
There was no reason to invade the place.
No, but having decided to invade, they didn't need to use all that force.
No, not
That's
at
the
all.
point. Now, what about Grenada itself? What's going to happen now? They've got a governor general of some kind, do they not?
Yes.
Of some kind, right.
And he's forming a new government?
Of some kind.
An interim government, I understand. It's supposed to be made up of non-political people so that all the political people will have a chance to run an election.
Because it was a democratically elected left-wing government which had been in power prior to the takeover from Bishop? No. Bishop conducted a coup too, didn't he? From Gary.
We can call it a coup if you like against Gary, right?
In other words, it's been a long time since there were free elections in Grenada.
Please, but let us not imagine that this was not democratic. They were trying to evolve a form of democracy because this Westminster form of government is just not working in the Caribbean, not only in Grenada, not in the Caribbean.
You mean you've got to have one man, one rule in the Caribbean?
No, it is not that way, Jack. No. They have this zonal council in which the people come together and they have a minister of government or what have you come in there and they put them on the hot seat. Now, just what's going on here? How come we can't get water at such and such? How come we can't this? How come we can't that? And the guy has to answer the question.
Kind of community involvement, you might say.
Exactly, and all through the island.
Did I see something about the Americans or was it the Canadians giving money to Grenada for reconstruction?
Yes, CUSO is now on a fundraising drive to raise money for medical and food aid to Grenada because it's an incredible disaster there at this time. I mean, you have 100,000 people. It's a small community.
100,000 people on Texada.
Yeah.
Frightening, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just nothing, and it's torn families apart. It's I don't know what it's really like there just now because we've left since last Friday, but I can imagine how the people are broken up.
Are you planning to go back?
At this point ourselves, no. But I wouldn't not go back. It would just depend on the circumstances.
How about you, Harvey?
Exactly the same. We don't know what's going to happen, really. I wouldn't go back as long as the Americans are there.
In other words, they've had a raw, horrible deal from the Americans with a totally unnecessary invasion.
Exactly.
Right. It was a sovereign
something that the Grenadian people should have been allowed to work out for themselves.
Right. Listen, I wish I could have given you more time this morning, but I can't because of the pressures of our local turmoil in British Columbia. Best luck to Sue Mitchell and Harvey Totten, ex-CUSO workers in Grenada, who give the back of their hand to the Yanks. Right?
You're right.
My thanks.
Thank
I'll be back with Dimitrios Roussopoulos after the break.
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I never touched it. I never did a thing to it.
Yeah, these goddamn little scarves that hang over microphones.
That's part of the problem.
Yeah, CUSO.
If you just undo your jacket and we'll run it in there, it'd be great. All right, now you can do your jacket back up.
Are you sure that's right?
Won't go anywhere.
1-800. We don't have 1-800 in this country. Do we?
Now that's good right there. There. Actually, split the differences. I don't want it rubbing against that. There.
You have another book, Becoming a World War III.
Yep. 30 seconds.
Finally told me.
Well, we can talk about both, or we can talk about...
Yeah, we'll talk about both.
We'll talk about the subject matter.
Dimitrios Roussopoulos has written a couple of terrifying books. One is an anthology called Our Generation Against, can you see that? Nuclear War, and the other, The Coming of World War III. I think the sensitivity as to nuclear disarmament has considerably broadened in public scope and awareness in the past year, especially with the cruise missiles. But give me, first of all, said he, the coming of World War III.
The war is coming. It's not a question of if it will come, it's a question of when it will come.
How close have we come lately, looking at any particular events like the Korean 007 or the Grenadian invasion?
Well, those are two different things. The Korean episode reflected the following, that there is, especially in military zones, a kind of technology that is at play there that can easily be misinterpreted by either side. This technology has a logic of its own. This new nuclear technology has a logic of its own, has an accumulative effect of its own, and it seems to be out of control. Around the Korean episode, we managed to escape by a hair. In the case of Grenada, what Ronald Reagan managed to do is to apply the Brezhnev doctrine. He considered it part of his sphere of influence in the same way in which the Soviet leadership considers Afghanistan part of its sphere of influence. If one can do it within their periphery, the other one will do it within their own periphery.
Otherwise, the old-fashioned imperialist spheres of influence and their exertion of their powers in that don't present the threat of nuclear war as the computerized technology today which could blow us away in a minute.
It's hard to take a grocer's inventory of which is more threatening, but it seems to me that the momentum of the technology edges the possibility and the probability towards a thermonuclear war in a more aggravated way, yes.
So in other words, were you to put a putative potential date on the coming of World War III, you could say any time between now and the year 2000?
I would say between, in the next 10 to 5 years. And I say this because that it's very important for people to understand that that technology is in fact out of control, and that the reason why the probabilities for a third world war have been extremely aggravated is because there is no political institution, no government, no state or group of states that, in my view, are sincerely moving towards arms control, disarmament, or conventional armament. That's reason number one. And reason number two is that there is no social institution, that is to say, the body of opinion that has sprung forward through its manifestations in public meetings or in public demonstrations in a whole variety of countries, even though that body of opinion, that movement, the peace movement, has become so massive in so short a time, and is certainly more massive than it was in the recent past, and is certainly more sophisticated organizationally and politically than it has been in the recent past. Nevertheless, that body of social opinion is not big enough, is not well organized enough, is not politically sophisticated enough to actually help us turn the corner.
Peace movement, you're saying, while it's broadening and effective, is still, quote, a dirty word in influential areas.
Well, apart from the fact that it may or may not be a dirty word, it is not massive enough. Because after all, what does all this mean? It means that the state, governments, whether here or elsewhere, like in the past, it is the same thing today, understand essentially one thing. And that is that they understand only power. When the movement becomes powerful enough, and it is clearly not powerful enough at the present time, when that movement becomes powerfully organized enough, then there is a hairline possibility, because I don't believe that the war is inevitable. I think that the war is highly probable. When that movement becomes powerful enough, that whole social phenomena that has moved so rapidly within the last 2.5 years, and it's important to ask why, then there is a slight possibility that we can turn the corner.
Tell me why.
Why it has become so massive?
Yeah.
It has become so massive, Jack, because there is, in my view, a continuity from the 1960s. We were told by the mass media, amongst other institutions, that after the 1960s came to an end, everybody went to sleep during the 1970s. Nothing could be further from the truth, because it was during the 1970s, after all, that the women's liberation movement was born, a massive social phenomenon, that the ecology movement was born.
Another massive social phenomenon.
Precisely, and especially the anti-nuclear power dimension of that movement, so that on June the 12th of 1982, in front of the United Nations, when you had almost 1 million people demonstrating for disarmament and peace, you saw hundreds and hundreds and thousands of women marching under the banners of women's groups. You saw hundreds and hundreds and thousands of ecologists marching under the banners of ecology. So that what does this mean? It means that there is a point of convergence that has accumulated over the last 2 decades, and that the new movement seems to be bringing people together under a new set of priorities.
More with Dimitrios Roussopoulos after the break. But the fact remains. To be fatalistic, I might say, name of goodness. You can have 1 million people in the streets in every capital in Europe and North America tomorrow, and still the same people are in charge and will not change their hard line of a preemptive strikes or the mutually assured destruction. What's the first step for sane human beings toward some nuclear disarmament? Unilateral action?
Well,
you know that would never take place.
Well, first of all, let's say this. We have to admit it openly, plainly, and honestly. There is a tremendous amount of hot wind that goes from east to west and from west to east. It's a huge propaganda battle between these two spheres of influence. And yet, we hear all sorts of proposals on both sides. But these proposals do not involve any action. Somewhere along the line, somebody has to act. Now, let us look at a historical example. In the 1960s, the late 1950s, the superpowers, as well as the other nuclear powers, were involved in the testing of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere.
Correct.
We were all being poisoned. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy unilaterally declared that the United States was going to cease testing nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, and he invited the other side to do likewise. Within a couple of months, as a matter of fact, they signed the Limited Test Ban Treaty.
All except the French.
All except the French. So that means somebody has to do something from one side in terms of action, not words, action, in order to get the logjam broken up. Now, in my view, this situation can only arise again if and when the peace movement becomes a powerful enough third force, if you will, a third perspective that creates a space between the two superpowers. And one of the ways that has to be done is to take careful attention and careful note of what happens in Eastern Europe. You know, we always have the question, and in my view it is a legitimate question, what about the Russians? And the way that question has to be addressed is as follows. In Western Europe, the movement, Jack, is so massive and so sophisticated that for the first time it has actually begun to get an echo in Eastern Europe. So that we see in countries like Hungary, in countries like East Germany, and in the Soviet Union, for the first time, the establishment of independent peace organizations that take a slightly different view from the official circles. The dialogue between these independent groups and the non-aligned and independent movement in Western Europe is a cause of a great deal of hope in creating this third force that can push both spheres of influence into positions that are much more reasonable, that might actually spill itself over into some kind of action.
If this can be developed by a massive peace movement, therefore, the real danger we face are repetitions on either of the giant sides of Korean 07.
A repetition?
I mean, the accidental nuclear war.
Oh, the accidental nuclear war, of course, of course. I mean, in an 18-month period, as a matter of fact, Jack, 147 false alarms were sounded by the defense system of North America, misinterpreting what the other side was about to do. So it's an extremely grave situation, but we have absolutely no choice but to expand the peace movement beyond the peripheries of today.
I am grateful indeed for a lucid exposition from Dimitrios Roussopoulos. And you should read the anthology of which is Our Generation Against Nuclear War, as well as The Coming of World War III. Grateful. I'll be back after the break. I always was a bit of a name dropper. Found a new golfing buddy this week. You might recognize him as you look at this little clip between me and my buddy. Tell me, James, how many times have you been beaten up, kidnapped, held hostage? How many people have you beaten up?
We've tried to count the bones broken and the muscles torn and whatever, and just can't do it. But it comes to about 25 bones, I think, broken. And
you look in remarkably good shape for your age.
That's why I'm sitting down. I can't stand up.
That, of course, is the irrepressible James Garner making a movie called Glitter Dome in Victoria. And we've got lots more with Jimmy Garner and Stuart Margolin, which we're going to give you for fun. Monday, 9 a.m. precisely.
Tory women.
Where is my kill button? Where is my kill button? There is no such place called Dildo, Newfoundland.
This is John Crosby. It's not me.
Oh, allow me a big...
We're going to have an R-rated program here this morning.
Draw. But there is a place called Dildo.
Absolutely. Been there for hundreds of years.
Thank you, sir. Just broke my glasses, look. Did you do that?
Oh, you don't need glasses anyway, Jack.
After the break. This one is spelt with an I.
Well, with blasphemy it is. Make it an E.
It should be an E, inquiring minds.
Notice, who wrote that?
Some nit at SFU.
I shall have him hanged.
Are we coming or not?
Yes, we are. 5, 4, Jack, 3, 2.
Will the teachers strike? Watch Webster on Check at midnight. James Garner of the Rockford Files with Webster, Monday, 9 a.m. precisely.